Donald Trump has lost control, and he knows he has lost control. Donald Trump has lost control of everything he thought he could control. He lost control of his war in Iran as soon as he started it. He's lost control of the Republican legislative process in Congress and is unable to get his bill through the Republican-controlled Senate, the bill that would allow Donald Trump to interfere in our elections. And Donald Trump's reaction to the loss of control is his most reliable reaction to everything. He lies. Or perhaps at this stage of what could be Donald Trump's neurological decline, he is not lying. He may just be hallucinating. This weekend, which he spent publicly proving that he can still drive a golf cart while being guided by the Secret Service, Donald Trump made a public statement on social media. This was on Saturday. At 3:52 p.m., Donald Trump posted, "Great poll numbers, thank you, 3 exclamation points." Now, of course, Donald Trump didn't say what poll numbers he might have been referring to, but at this point, we should know that he wasn't referring to any poll numbers at all. That was just Donald Trump's reaction to his provably terrible poll numbers, something he cannot control. The Marquette Law School poll that had just come out showed that 70% of Americans disapprove of how Donald Trump is handling the economy. Donald Trump knows that those poll numbers exist, and Donald Trump knows there is absolutely nothing he can do to control his poll numbers. And because Donald Trump knows that he has no control over the events swirling around him, which are the result of his own ignorance and incompetence, that's what has led to his poll numbers. And we have breaking news reporting, as Rachel just indicated. We have breaking news reporting tonight about something else Donald Trump has lost control of. His choice of airplane. And it's much worse than we thought. It was widely reported that when Donald Trump left the NATO summit in Turkey last month, he did not use the 747 that the dictator of Qatar gave to Donald Trump as a gift. Important reporting by the New York Times and others showed that the Qatari jet does not have all of the equipment, including the security equipment, on the real Air Force One, which then arrived in Turkey apparently to take the place of Donald Trump's favorite new plane for security reasons. But tonight, in what was first exclusively reported by the Washington Post says, an Iranian assassination threat against President Donald Trump prompted an extraordinary operation last month in which he flew secretly from Turkey on an alternate military aircraft while the White House said he was aboard Air Force One, the Washington Post has learned. The clandestine mission, which has not been reported previously, was carried out unbeknownst to journalists and some White House staff members who believed they were on the same plane as the president, according to material reviewed by the Post, a U.S. official familiar with the operation and another person with knowledge of the president's travel. In Ankara, Trump boarded the old Air Force One jumbo jet in view of television cameras. He was secretly shuttled minutes later to a smaller plane, an Air Force C-32A, via an airport catering truck, typically used to load meals and other supplies pre-flight, according to the U.S. official and corroborating material reviewed by the Post. That made Air Force One a decoy, with media and some White House staff aboard, the official said. The operation occurred a night after U.S. forces renewed military strikes on Iran at Trump's direction following a breakdown of negotiations between Washington and Tehran. A White House spokesperson did not deny the Washington Post's reporting and instead issued a statement simply saying, as the president has said recently, there are many enemies of America who have their sights on him, and we use every tool at our disposal to address those threats. There are many, many ways for Donald Trump to experience just how much control he does not have. Every day that the Senate is in session, the Republican leader of the Senate refuses to even attempt a vote on the legislation that Donald Trump calls the SAVE Act, that Donald Trump wants to pass, that would give him the ability to interfere in our elections. And every once in a while, Donald Trump issues a threatening social media post about passing that legislation in the Senate, and then he does absolutely nothing because Donald Trump cannot control the Republican Senate to give him everything he wants legislatively. And imagine, just imagine tonight, what a loss of control Donald Trump must have been feeling in Turkey when he was told that he not only could not fly on the Qatari jet that he illegally accepted as a gift from a dictator, but he could not fly on Air Force One. The Washington Post reports numerous people participated in the deception, some unwittingly, and journalists who thought they were traveling with the president aboard the Legacy Air Force One were not notified that he had changed aircraft or made aware of the extent of the threat on Air Force One, the U.S. officials said. The new Air Force One jet gifted by Qatar departed Turkey first early in the evening of July 8th. Trump then boarded the Legacy blue and white Air Force One at dusk, waving goodbye on camera, to exit that plane without being seen by those uninvolved in the operation. Trump and several aides stepped aboard an airport catering truck, which was elevated plane side using hydraulics and positioned at a door on the opposite side of Air Force One's entrance, according to the U.S. official and other corroborating material. It's not clear how Trump moved from the C-32A to the Legacy Air Force One after landing, but he appeared before television cameras and descended external stairs from the Legacy Air Force One about 10:56 p.m. And so Donald Trump had no control at all of how he traveled away from that NATO summit. No control. In a plane he never wanted to fly in, moving on a catering truck from one plane to another to do that, because Donald Trump was not in control of that situation. And we are now at day 164 of the war that Donald Trump started and cannot control. Donald Trump wanted this war to be over in days. Donald Trump's initial public estimates of how long his war would take were given in days and sometimes at the most in weeks. He never said it would take 164 days. Along with all of the usual pressures to end an unpopular war, Donald Trump faces the political pressure of the coming election, which is now 85 days away. The best measure to use when trying to project how much longer a war will last is to consider the negotiating positions of the warring parties and ask how long it would take for those negotiating positions to get close. When Donald Trump began his war, his negotiating position for ending his war included a complete change of governing regime in Iran and a promise that the new regime in Iran would never develop nuclear weapons, something that the regime in Iran had already promised and put in writing in a deal negotiated by Secretary of State John Kerry on behalf of President Obama. That nuclear deal, in which Iran promised to never, ever, ever develop a nuclear weapon, was working perfectly when Donald Trump, in his first term, decided to withdraw the United States from that agreement. And so, Donald Trump's opening negotiating position in his war was for Iran to please agree to what Iran had already agreed to with President Obama. And 164 days later, the warring parties have never been farther apart. And Donald Trump cannot even pretend to have the slightest bit of control over what happens next.
You said this last round of talks was Iran's last chance before decapitation. So what now? What comes next?
You'll find out.
You'll find out. That's today. That's the best Donald Trump can do today on day 164 of his war. You'll find out, meaning Donald Trump has no idea what comes next. The reporter's question was, what comes next? And what came on Saturday were new demands by Iran that we know Donald Trump could never agree to, especially the first one, which was never threaten Iran verbally or otherwise and never insult the sacred values of this nation. That would not be difficult for any other president if ending a war was at stake, to promise to not insult the country or attack or threaten the country. On Saturday, the Secretary of Iran's Supreme National Security Council issued 6 new demands on the United States to end the war. Those demands included, first of all, to never threaten Iran, and then 2, permanently end its wars and aggression against Iran and Iran's allies in Lebanon, Palestine, Yemen, and Iraq. 3, withdraw its naval blockade and its military forces, naval and air, from the vicinity of Iran. 4, fully compensate Iran for the damages caused by the 2 aggressive and imposed wars. 5, lift the cruel and illegal sanctions imposed against the Iranian nation. 6, immediately and unconditionally release Iran's frozen and seized assets. The Iranian dictatorship knows how impossible some of those demands are. Here is what one of Donald Trump's former defense secretaries from his first term, Mark Esper, said yesterday about those demands.
These demands they've now raised last night show that they are emboldened, that they feel confident about their position in the world.
The Iranian regime knows that that list of demands that they put out actually says, what the subtext is. And what that list of demands says from Iran is, we are not 85 days away from negotiating a peace agreement with Donald Trump. That is the Iranian regime's way of saying this war will be going on election day in America, in what would be the 249th day of Donald Trump's war. And with all of the negative factors facing Republicans on election day, it is impossible tonight to calculate just what the 249th day of Donald Trump's war will feel like to voters on election day. The one thing that is certain is that it will feel worse than it feels today on the 164th day. American voters have proved before that they do not feel better about unpopular wars the longer those wars go on. We know now exactly what Donald Trump will be saying. I mean exactly what he'll be saying days before the November 3rd election, if his war is still going on. We know that on November 1st, Donald Trump will say that his war is going to end in a day or 2. Donald Trump has told that lie dozens of times before. He will not be reluctant to tell that lie again as election day approaches. He'll tell the lie that peace is at hand, the lie that he is going to win his war in a couple of days. Donald Trump stayed abjectly silent about Iran's new negotiating position when Iran announced those positions on Saturday. And Donald Trump remained silent all of the next day of his golf weekend. Not one word of reaction to a new set of negotiating positions by Iran. It took Donald Trump 2 full days to finally, today at 12:31 p.m., issue his written reply to Iran's new demands on social media. And Donald Trump took his turn to push the negotiation parties' positions even farther apart into the most impossible zones. Donald Trump announced a set of demands, not one of which he will ever achieve in his negotiations with Iran. Donald Trump's utterly unserious reply to Iran says, I see that representatives of the Islamic Republic of Iran are asking for compensation for the damage done to them during the last 5-month military conflict started because they will not have a nuclear weapon, even though it was never mentioned in any of our negotiations or meetings, ! But it is an interesting idea because now I am likewise demanding compensation from Iran for all of the people that they have killed and gravely wounded with their roadside bombs in many conflicts for which they are famous, as led initially by General Soleimani, including including the families of those killed on the USS Cole, which happened 26 years ago, and thousands of others killed in combat. Additionally, compensation should be paid to the families of the hundreds of thousands of innocent protesters that Iran has killed over the last 50 years, not to mention the 52,000 that have been killed in the last 5 months. I have instructed my representatives to put this firmly into any and all future negotiations. Thank you for your attention to this matter. There is no president before Donald Trump who would ever disrespect the words of the presidency as much as Donald Trump does on a daily basis. Donald Trump knows that every single negotiating point he announced in that childish post is absolutely ludicrous and will never be achieved. And he ended that post by saying, I have instructed my representatives to put this firmly into any and all future negotiations. The news media has often referred in the past to presidents drawing red lines in foreign policy. And then the news media eagerly tries to detect any faltering in that president's view of that red line when it comes to the president's so-called previously announced red line. No one in the news media will ever consider holding Donald Trump responsible for failing to get compensation for every American killed in combat in Iraq, which is what he's asking for, without actually using the word Iraq in that post, or any of the things Donald Trump is demanding compensation for now. Because all, and I mean all, 100% of the American news media knows that Donald Trump is a joke, including the sections of the so-called news media who fully support Donald Trump. None of them believe a word of what Donald Trump said in his new statement about negotiating positions. No one at Fox or any of the propaganda sections of the Trump-supporting media will ever say that Donald Trump failed to get what he was asking for in his negotiations with Iran, because they think what Donald Trump says about his negotiations with Iran is a joke. They don't think a word Donald Trump says matters. And that's true of every sector of the American news media covering Donald Trump and Donald Trump's war in Iran in any way. And we are all in the news media getting that right. What Donald Trump says is a joke. We all know that. The entire news media does. And that's why Donald Trump can say things like this.
Can you give us any estimate of when you think the Strait of Hormuz will be part of
it's open now. We're taking a lot of shit. It's open now.
Can you imagine what the news media reaction would be if any other president told a lie like that in a time of war? The Strait of Hormuz is open now. The Wall Street Journal reports for weeks President Trump has been laying the groundwork to declare victory in the Iran war should Tehran fully reopen the Strait of Hormuz, even floating the idea privately to senior aides that he's willing to walk away without a nuclear deal, U.S. officials said. But that scaled-back objective became more difficult when Iran insisted Saturday on its highest price yet for permitting the free flow of traffic in the waterway, seeking billions of dollars in U.S. payments, the removal of American troops from the region, and an end of the U.S. naval blockade, among other things. Iran's ability to essentially choke off the waterway through sporadic missile and drone attacks has proven to be powerful leverage for the country, stalling commercial traffic and roiling global oil markets. Trump has declared repeatedly in recent weeks that the Strait of Hormuz was already fully open, but each of those promises has proven premature. That's a nice word for it, premature. Iran does appear to be making progress in a negotiation about the Strait of Hormuz, but not with the United States. The New York Times reports Iran and Oman have been negotiating an agreement on the future management of the Strait of Hormuz, which sits between the two countries. Iran effectively closed the strait in retaliation for being attacked by the United States and Israel in February. Officials familiar with the emerging deal have said it could formalize some of Iran's claims of control over shipping in the waterway. And so, on day 164 of Donald Trump's war against Iran, Donald Trump has achieved nothing, and Iran is now closer to achieving something it has never had before: control of the Strait of Hormuz, while Donald Trump controls nothing. Leading off our discussion tonight is Democratic Congresswoman Maggie Goodlander of New Hampshire. She's a member of the House Armed Services Committee and a former U.S. Navy Reserve intelligence officer. Thank you very much for joining us tonight, Representative Goodlander. What is your reaction, first of all, to this breaking news tonight that we learned of Donald Trump not just having to switch from his illegally obtained plane from the Qatari dictator to the real Air Force One, but to just pass through Air Force One, get on a catering truck, and ride over to another Air Force plane to secretly fly out, because that's how much of a threat Donald Trump was in beyond his control when he was in Turkey.
Well, Lawrence, thanks so much for having me. Look, this is a president who is totally out of control and who's using really the most profound and powerful tools in the world in direct response to what he perceives to be attacks on his own ego. You know, in the case of the story about Air Force One, it seems like a lifetime ago, but it was just a few weeks ago that we discovered, you know, the president weaponized the Department of Justice against the New York Times simply for reporting the truth. You know, now more than ever, it is important to speak the truth, and this is the greatest threat to a person like Donald Trump, who really does want absolute control and is totally out of control.
Yeah, and listen, I mean, I think everyone would agree that they absolutely should have done whatever was necessary in safety terms, to get a president out of a situation like that. No one's faulting that. But this is someone, as you point out, who wanted to prosecute the New York Times for reporting on anything about that whole situation and the need to switch planes. And now tonight, the White House is not disputing this story at all.
And this is just another day in this long saga.
As we go toward the election, does it feel to you, when you see the negotiating positions of both parties as of tonight, on each side more extreme than they have been at any point before, Donald Trump's positions and Iran's positions, does this seem like something that's going to be a negotiated solution before Election Day?
Lawrence, it really doesn't. And I've been thinking today, being in O'Donnell, you might remember this old Irish joke of a hapless tourist wandering along the Irish countryside. He happens upon a farmer and asks, "How do I get to Dublin?" And the farmer looks at him and scratches his head and says, "If I were trying to get to Dublin, I wouldn't start from here." And that, to me, really sums up the situation that President Trump has put us in. He's left us with two horrendously bad options. One, to continue a war that has been bad for the American people, and the second option being stomaching a deal that will be bad for the American people. And no reasonable person, no commander-in-chief truly in command and honoring the Constitution would put our country in this situation. And now is a time for serious people, not for semi-negotiating or low-keying it, as the president has said. It's a time for serious people to actually rally the world around our cause. And that is unfortunately not what we have. And that's the tragedy of the situation, that you go to war with the president that you have, and we have never had a more ineffective and dangerous president.
In our next segment, we're going to talk to Edgar Weissman about Donald Trump's inability to control the criminal prosecutions that he wants. You were the victim of one of those. You're one of the people in Congress who simply joined in a video telling the American military that they do not have to follow illegal orders. Donald Trump wanted you prosecuted for that and failed in that. What do you take away from that experience?
Well, Lawrence, I served at the Justice Department for years. It was one of the best experiences of my life to work alongside patriotic, nonpartisan public servants who really looked to two things when bringing cases: the facts and the law. And so for the president to become so unglued by what we said, which really at bottom was a restatement of a bedrock principle of American law. The message was follow the law. And our law, a bedrock principle of law, is that in this country, our service members do not blindly follow orders. They follow the law. And that's what makes us truly great as a country. But for the president to become so unglued by that really speaks volumes to how the playbook is being executed. This is a playbook that is about silencing, about trying to intimidate, and trying to derail people who are simply doing their jobs, whether it's members of Congress or journalists or nonpartisan public servants. This is a time now to be more committed than ever before to that basic mission. And I can tell you that these threats, this effort to derail us, has not worked and will never work. We love this country, we love our Constitution, and we will always have the backs of our service members.
Representative Maggie Goodlander, thank you very much for starting off our coverage tonight.
Thank you, Lawrence.
And coming up, Donald Trump's complete loss of control is reflected perfectly in the reflecting pool story, which includes Donald Trump's inability to control who gets prosecuted by his Justice Department for his mistakes. Andrew Weissman joins us next. Donald Trump believes that he should control federal prosecutions. He believes that it should be within his presidential power to control who gets indicted and prosecuted on federal charges. Donald Trump has been learning and relearning the lesson that he has no control over federal prosecutions, even though he does control the Trump Justice Department. The Trump Justice Department has failed in its attempt to prosecute people Donald Trump doesn't like former FBI Director James Comey. And the Trump Justice Department failed in its attempts to prosecute New York State Attorney General Letitia James. And most recently, the Trump Justice Department failed in their attempts to prosecute three-time Olympic athlete David Hearn on vandalism charges for something done to the reflecting pool, which no one quite knows what Hearn's accused of, which has been gravely harmed, actually, by everything Donald Trump has done to the reflecting pool. Last week, Donald Trump's incompetent U.S. attorney in Washington, D.C., had to drop her attempted prosecution of David Hearn on vandalism charges involving the reflecting pool. But Donald Trump's reaction to that was to say U.S. Attorney Jeanine Pirro should revisit her hastily made decision. Everything about the reflecting pool story reflects Donald Trump's inability to control what he thought he could control and what he wants to control. Donald Trump thought he could control what the reflecting pool looks like, and he couldn't even do that. Donald Trump managed to turn the reflecting pool into an algae pool. And Donald Trump tried to prosecute people as a cover for his own failures with the reflecting pool. And now the reflecting pool stands as yet another simple and understandable reflection that Donald Trump does not know what he is doing in the presidency and cannot control what he so desperately wants to control. Joining us now is Andrew Weissman, former FBI general counsel and an MS Now legal analyst. He's the author of the best-selling book, Liar's Kingdom, How to Stop Trump's Deceit and Save America. Andrew, I don't mean to be in any way excusing the horror of a president basically picking people he wants to prosecute, which is what we've seen him do time and time again here. But he has not been able to get the kind of control over these prosecutions that he expected.
That is absolutely true. It is worth remembering that he does have absolute control over who does not get prosecuted, either because he can tell his Department of Justice not to prosecute, or he can exercise his pardon power, which he has done with abandon for people who are in so many ways undeserving of that power. But with respect to affirmative prosecutions, there are a number of checks in the system that he simply cannot control. So grand jurors have rejected. With respect to your last guest, it's a perfect example of the lawlessness of Donald Trump, the lawlessness of the Department of Justice, but the lawfulness of the grand jurors. And the reporting is not a single grand juror in D.C. thought that this is an appropriate prosecution and would vote for it. Not one of the grand jurors. And second, there are judges. And third, there are trial jurors that all have to make separate independent decisions. That being said, Lawrence, an enormous amount of pain can be inflicted, not just on the people who are being sought to be prosecuted and have to worry about it, but then the chilling effect on everyone else, which is the point. So from Donald Trump's perspective and the Department of Justice's perspective, and I hate to even call it that at this point, it's sort of a win-win. It's a win if the case can actually go forward, but the deterrent effect is going to be there.
So Jeanine Pirro is one of Donald Trump's favorites, had been up until she was forced to drop these charges in the reflecting pool case. What do you think other federal prosecutors around the country see when they see even Jeanine Pirro giving up and dropping one of these cases?
Well, just like the reflecting pool writ large, it's an example of the incompetence, the gross incompetence of that office. They're trying to blame the Department of the Interior, but the job of the prosecutor is to examine and kick the tires before the case is brought, not after. And so I think the other thing they may see is something that I suspect, which is, remember, this is a case, the reflecting pool case, that was going to go to trial at the end of September. So look at the calendar. That's shortly before the midterms. And according to her, we know what she thinks of the evidence because she put it in writing. This was going to be an unmitigated disaster at a time that is, let's just say, not conducive to what the Republicans want to do and this White House wants to do in the midterms.
Andrew, please stay with us. We're going to squeeze in a commercial break. When we come back, I want to discuss the Trump ballroom project, which has also run into very significant legal trouble. We're going to have more with Andrew Weissmann after this break. And we're back with Andrew Weissmann. Andrew, an appeals court blocking Donald Trump's ballroom said each president is a temporary tenant, not the owner of the White House, and the bold assertion that the executive can act with utter lawlessness, destroying treasured national landmarks, harming the interests of individuals, and that no court can stop it, flouts our constitutional order. Andrew, this feels like one of those decisions where you get to say, yeah, okay, this is what we thought the world was.
Absolutely. So it's beautifully written. It is a 2-to-1 decision. It starts there by noting that it is a piece of public property, the White House. It is owned by the people, is controlled by Congress, not by the president, any president. And I just want to read one sentence from the decision that's just so beautifully written. We are aware of no instance in American history in which a president unilaterally and using privately collected funds demolished substantial portions of the White House that Congress authorized to be built and American taxpayers paid for until now. And it goes on to explain why it is completely unlawful. And the position of the government that you referred to, Lawrence, which is that you can do nothing to stop us. That was the position to the court, even if they had knocked down the Statue of Liberty, was rejected soundly in this 2-to-1 decision by the court.
And this is another one of those situations where Donald Trump believes he completely controls the White House, the actual structure, can do whatever he wants, and the court says absolutely not.
Yes, but sadly here, because he engaged in self-help and decided to do something that now has been found by both the lower court and the Court of Appeals to be illegal, we are left, though, with the scar. And again, you've talked about the reflecting poll. The East Wing is such a visible scar and representation of what this president has done to this country.
Andrew Weissmann, thank you very much for joining us tonight.
You're welcome.
And coming up, if Republicans lose control of the House of Representatives in November's election, Donald Trump will face real congressional accountability for everything he's doing for the first time. One of the Democrats with the strongest chance of taking a seat in the House of Representatives away from Republicans is our next guest, Paige Cognetti, the mayor of Scranton, Pennsylvania, who is now running for Congress. Mayor Cognetti joins us next. The Cook Political Report, which has been closely and impartially studying congressional campaigns longer than anyone else in the business, has 19 seats in the United States House of Representatives listed as toss-ups in the midterm elections. One of them is Pennsylvania's 8th congressional district. The most recent polling, sponsored by Democrats, is showing Democrat Paige Cognetti with a narrow 2-point lead over Republican incumbent Rob Bresnahan. PBS reports the race between Cognetti, the mayor of Scranton, and Bresnahan is considered one of the Democratic Party's best opportunities to pick up a seat in the November election. In its bid to take control of the U.S. House and block President Donald Trump's agenda, Trump has made data centers a top priority to help the U.S. compete against China for AI superiority. However, communities across the U.S. have fought many of the projects, including in northeastern Pennsylvania, where complexes of data centers and new high-voltage transmission lines are planned. Fights between communities and developers have landed in court. In her latest campaign ad, Paige Cognetti compares Pennsylvania's coal mining history to the development of data centers in the state.
The coal and shale beneath our feet powered this country. We know what that's worth. We know what it costs. Big companies have come before, take what they wanted, and left us with their mess to clean up. Now it's data centers. Here's the deal. Big tech needs to pay their own way, not hide behind NDAs. No tax breaks. Don't raise our electric bills. Don't poison our water. And hire local, union labor. You can't meet that?
Goodbye.
Then get out. I'm Paige Cognetti, and I approve this ad. This is our home. We are not for sale.
Joining us now is Mayor Paige Cognetti of Scranton, Pennsylvania. She's the Democratic candidate for Pennsylvania's 8th congressional district. Thank you very much for joining us tonight. Your position on data centers is not that you're not saying ban them. You're saying here is what they need to comply with.
Thank you. Yeah. You can do this in a way that works. We have projects in Pennsylvania. There's one down in Berwick at a nuclear site. There's one in Southwest at a decommissioned coal plant. The people that are running those data center projects have been at the table with the localities, with union labor from day one. We can make that work. If there are community benefits, if those companies are building these away from schools, away from where people live, if they're showing that they are going to build their own energy infrastructure, they're not going to poison our water, we can do this in a responsible way. The ones that are being proposed here in northeastern Pennsylvania are disqualifying from the very beginning. Every auditorium I go to, every meeting I've sat through, the folks on the dais has said, oh no, we can't tell you who we are. We have an NDA. If you can't tell us who you are, we cannot give you permission in our localities in northeastern Pennsylvania to build a data center. There's a way to do it responsibly. That's not what's being proposed here in our region.
Do voters see this as a partisan issue? Do they perceive Donald Trump to be someone who is trying to push those data centers into their neighborhoods?
I've spent a lot of time in these meetings over the last 10 months or so. Folks leave their political stripes at home. It's actually something that is giving me a lot of hope for the future, that we can mend some of the fabric of our country. When you see people fighting for each other, for their neighbors, even though I know in these rooms it is split down the middle who people voted for in 2024. This issue is bringing back folks together, fighting for each other, fighting for their neighbors, their family, their health, air quality, water quality. So I don't see it as a partisan issue. I see it as a vehicle for people to come together, fight together. And there's a lot of anger out there about a lot of things. Costs are one big thing that's coming through here. Utility costs are already through the roof in our region. The data center fight is part of that. Corruption is also a part of that. It feels like these companies that are hiding behind NDAs are coming in to exploit us. It's not development, it's exploitation. It feels that way, and folks are really viewing this in a nonpartisan way, in my view.
Have you had to deal with issues like this as mayor?
Sure. We actually have, not in our city, but just on the ridge above us, 3 that are proposed. If those data centers went through, it would flood really a lot of the homes that are already the most flood prone in our city. So we are fighting. Our law department is working hard on this. We're working at what we can do to push back. The permits that these data centers would have to get, we really have to make sure that our state environmental protection agency is very strong on this. That's part of our advocacy. And me as mayor, we are working with mayors across the state to make sure that DEP is ready for this. So again, people hiding behind NDAs, we got to cut the tax breaks. Right now, you don't need the carrot and a stick in the way that maybe you thought you did a few years ago. The carrot at this point would be getting anything approved going forward.
Mayor Paige Cognetti of Scranton, now a candidate for Congress, thank you very much for joining us tonight.